invited to think critically about what you know and how you know it in your different subject areas. We're looking at big ideas. So we're not focusing in on content. There is no content in the Theory of Knowledge course. It's something that makes it really exciting to teach, because every day I can bring in something different from the outside world. Whether it's going to change in the next 6 months, like the content of your AI tool that you're using at the minute, you don't know very much. And I don't mean that in a horrible way. The capital of Australia is Sydney, and killing is wrong. Now, what I'd like you to do, just for a moment, is to think about those knowledge claims and think about how true they are. There are maps, I know, where straight lines are drawn on them that divide places. It's also why straight lines are all over the edges of states in the United States. The dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan in 1945 was justified. We just hear, see, and think differently when it comes to what art is trying to do. If I'm a scientist and I'm experimenting, I can experiment all day on a block of wood, and I will always get the same result with that experiment. But if I try and do the same thing more than once to a person, then they learn. You can apply it to things happening in the world every day. Bring a critical mind to what you're learning. And when I say that, I don't mean don't believe what your teachers are telling you. That would be silly. But what I mean is always think, how do we know that? Or is that really true? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sparkl's Introduction to Theory of Knowledge. My name is Matthew Raggett. I'm the director of the Thuringia International School in Germany and have been a TOK teacher for, I think, 27 years now. So it's something that I'm familiar with on a daily basis. Although I've been a head of school for about 12 years, both in Germany and in India at the Doon School, I've always taught TOK, and I was a physics teacher before that. But the thing that gets me most excited about the DP program is actually Theory of Knowledge, which is a core part of the program. So some of you watching today have finished your 10th and you're wondering what this new topic subject is. Some of you at the end of the 11th, I hope you have an idea about what it is by now. But there might still be some clarity that you're looking for about what we are trying to do in Theory of Knowledge. So let's just make a little start on what the point of it is. So it's a core subject. It's rather like the CAS element and the extended essay element of the diploma program. It's one of the things that gives you the 3 bonus points at the end of the course. So 6 subjects at 7 points each is 42. And then you can get an extra 3 to try and get closer to that magic 45. And it's a subject that you will do every week in school. It's a subject that is assessed both internally by your teachers and externally by examiners. And it's a subject in which you're invited to think critically about what you know and how you know it in your different subject areas. So for years at school, you've been doing, 9, 10 subjects maybe, but I think very rarely are you invited to think about how those subject areas work, how mathematics is fundamentally different from science, or how history is completely different from the way that human scientists work as well. So you're going to learn about how specialists work in their subject areas, and you're going to be invited to take what you know and learn back into your classroom and even back onto the exam papers for the subjects that you've chosen. And in Theory of Knowledge, we're looking at big ideas. So we're not focusing in on content. There is no content in the Theory of Knowledge course. It's something that makes it really exciting to teach, because every day I can bring in something different from the outside world that's been going on, that might be in the news, that people might be writing about, that people are thinking about. We're talking about the big ideas, and we're using subject areas and content as a vehicle for really digging into how we know what we know, how certain we are about it, and what other possible perspectives might be. And it's not just a sort of wishy-washy thing where we're exploring, well, I think this and you think that. No. We're actually digging down to look at how you find evidence, how you justify a knowledge claim, how you put knowledge to the test and see whether or not it's going to be standing up there in another 1,000 years, like Pythagorean mathematics is, or whether it's going to change in the next 6 months, like the content of your AI tool that you're using at the minute, or, like physics did in the early 20th century. It changed every 6 weeks. It's a practical subject area. Yes, you can get a TOK textbook. Yes, you can look at classic examples of what we're trying to do when we're being critical thinkers. But you can apply it to things happening in the world every day. And I suppose what you're going to do is become better at thinking out loud. And when I say thinking out loud, it's not just speaking, it's also writing, because writing is thinking out loud. And I'm going to ask you, as we go through this, to write some things in the public chat so that I can take a little bit of your input as we go along. When you're doing the TOK course in school, you have got to contribute. A lot of what you're going to learn is not going to come from the teacher. It's going to come from what other people bring to the room, based on their experiences, their cultures, their belief systems, what they're reading, what they've listened to. And you've got to be ready to listen, take it in, put it to the test, and develop your ideas. Yeah? And let's recognize that, how old are we all? I mean, I've been doing this a while, but most of you are probably 16 to 17, 18 years old. You don't know very much. And I don't mean that in a horrible way. You're very bright, but you just haven't experienced a lot of the things that there are in the world. And your mind is going to change in the next few years. And being open to that change is really important. And TOK is one of those things that helps make you more open. So I'm going to share a couple of slides as we go through this. Let me share my window with you and open this up, and we'll start looking at a couple of these ideas. Let me fill the screen for you. So what we think we know. As we go through this, what we're going to be thinking about is, what do we know is true? And how do we know it? You'll remember when you were really small, you had some ideas and some thoughts that you really did think were true. And maybe your mind has changed on those over the last few years because you have seen more, or you know more, or you realize your parents told you those things, perhaps to make life a bit safer for you or a bit easier for them. How do we know it? That's what we're going to look into. We're going to think about the difference between what a knowledge claim is and what an opinion is, and imagine these at the ends of a spectrum, and how you move from one to the other. And we're going to finish by examining the areas of knowledge, which are the subject areas. So areas of knowledge is the TOK lingo for the subject areas that you have in school. So we're going to start by thinking about these two knowledge claims. The capital of Australia is Sydney, and killing is wrong. Now, what I'd like you to do just for a moment is to think about those knowledge claims and think about how true they are. And if you're sure that they're true, think about how you would explain that truth to somebody. And if you've got something that you're ready to think, put it in the chat so that other people can see it too. Remember that we're learning from each other. I'll give you 30 seconds to put something down in that chat. The capital of Australia is Sydney. Killing is wrong. Now, of course, we don't know each other. We've not built up a relationship of trust, and that is a big part of what we're doing in a TOK classroom. But Ashwin has shared that based on prior knowledge and using a moral compass, I guess the moral compass is probably about the killing, not so much about the capital of Australia. Aradhana read in a textbook. So textbooks, they're probably quite reliable, aren't they? They're produced often by government printing presses, or they might be produced by private companies, but you don't want things that aren't right in a textbook. Although, of course, as soon as it's published, it's out of date. And here we've got Snigdha has said, killing's generally considered wrong because it harms people. However, this is only an evolutionary and utilitarian framework. Hey, I mean, already, just from 3 people's input, we've got some different ways of looking at things, haven't we? So, where did that moral compass come from? That's important, isn't it? Did it come from my parents? Did it come from my culture? Did it come from a religion that I might be part of? Religion has quite a lot to say about ethics and morality. It certainly doesn't have, ethics and morality certainly doesn't have anything to say about Australia. Although it might have something to say about people going to Australia and claiming it as their own, which of course has happened all over the world. You know the history as well as I do. You've been taught since childhood. Yeah, the stories that we are told. Children grow. So I'm sitting in Germany. Children growing up in Germany are told stories about the history of this part of the world that they then take with them into adult life. I know that the students I taught in India had different stories to explain things as well. There's facts, there's beliefs, and there's morals, Aditya's written too. So how do I go about checking those things? So a few things shared. I'm just looking at my notes here as well. I appreciate you taking part. Thinking out loud is going to bring an awful lot of benefit when you do the TOK course. You'll see that already if you're going into DP2. If you're just about to go into DP1, try and develop that habit of thinking out loud. You don't need to be right. That's not important. You need to justify what you're saying. You need to think about the evidence for it. So, is there any evidence that Sydney is the capital of Australia? Well, if you go there, it's certainly the biggest city. It's certainly an exciting city, and it's probably the most famous city outside of Australia. How would I find out? Would I go there? Would I read it in a textbook? Would I ask an Australian? Maybe they've got a better view and are better informed than somebody else. But I'm certainly going to find out very quickly that Canberra is the capital of Australia. What about the killing is wrong? Well, I mean, I know that people are employed in the army. The army's job is to exercise force and violence when we run out of diplomatic solutions. So there might be times when killing is not wrong. If we're under threat, if something bad is happening to me, there's always self-defense, isn't there? So these 2 claims have something different about them in that one of them's a plain fact and I can check it. The capital of Australia is Canberra. Now, capital cities do move. I'm sat in Germany. The capital city when I was growing up was Bonn in West Germany. And now the capital city is Berlin, which was always the capital of Germany since the end of the First World War. But it changed when it was a different regime in East Germany. So even facts change, and we have to be ready to accept that when we are critical thinkers. But both of these things are knowledge claims. I can test one of them, and I can check for the truth of each of them. Now, back to this. Let's have another look at the next slide. So, opinions and knowledge claims. Now, a spin on the first claim. Sydney is the best city in Australia, and Canberra is the capital of Australia. Now, these are not particularly important or difficult things. They're not long or complicated ideas, but there's a difference between these 2 things. Can you have a think about what some of the key differences are between these 2 knowledge claims? And in 30 seconds time, I'll look at some of the ideas that you've shared in the chat. Okay, so Aaron and Sia have both said there that one's an opinion and one's fact. Sydney is the best city, certainly an opinion, because you might have been to Victoria or Melbourne and you might think, oh, well, Melbourne's the best city, actually. You might have been to Western Australia and think Perth's the best city. Maybe that's the only experience that you've got, so it is your best city in Australia. And of course, that can change as well, can't it? My opinion can change because I grow and gain more experience. It's also something that it's an idea I can argue about. So perhaps if I meet someone from another city, they'll have an opinion that might help move my opinion along. The fact that Canberra is the capital, again, it's that fact, isn't it? Now, these are still claims that I can challenge, although I'd be a bit of a fool to challenge the Canberra one. It really is a fact. I can go and look it up. Some of you wrote earlier, I'm just looking back, that here we go. We can look on a map, or we could use a globe and justify that it's the capital. Maps have a long and complicated history of being drawn by different people. And there are maps, I know, where straight lines are drawn on them that divide places. It's also why straight lines are all over the edges of states in the United States, because someone put it there. So it's contestable. People have interests in drawing boundaries of maps as well. What kind of power is at play when people are drawing maps and making decisions about where places are on maps? When it comes to Sydney being the best city, I might have a bias. My wife might be from Sydney. I might have only been there. But biases and also stereotypes, people from Australia are really cool and laid back and they're great surfers. I know that there's a really good beach in Sydney. Maybe that's why I think it's the best place. Yeah. Right. Someone's just written about Greenland and Africa being similar sizes on maps. There's all sorts of problems with maps. They're very exciting things to look at. But these are contestable. A knowledge claim has to be something you can actually challenge and put to the test. Opinions, you can challenge them, but they're not quite as contestable because we're all entitled to them. And our experiences give us that sense of what's best or what's right or wrong about them. We can reach an agreement on them, but that agreement is actually different from the quality of the agreement we have when we think about what is the capital city of Australia. Now, these things are not really big or important, but the idea is that I can challenge things. I can look for evidence of things. And when I say things, I mean knowledge claims. What you are going to need to be able to do, though, is talk about them and write them down. So we're going to move into a little exercise here on the next slide. I'm just going to bring that up into full view for you. We're going to look at 4 different knowledge claims. And what I would like you to do when you were thinking about each of these is to look at the 3 questions. It's the same 3 questions each time. Is this a knowledge claim or is it something else? How would you go about checking it or justifying it? And then who gets to decide if it's true? Now, these are big questions in theory of knowledge. And that one at the end, who gets to decide if it's true, is really tied up with those things that you've had in school for years that are called subjects. We have subject specialists. We have historians. We have artists, mathematicians, physicists. Who gets to decide what's true? So the first knowledge claim is that the universe began almost 14 billion years ago. So have a think, spend a moment, and then write something down in the chat about whether that's a knowledge claim or an opinion or something else. How would you go about checking or justifying, and who gets to decide if that's true? Now, you might have noticed that I didn't ask you whether you think it's true. That's not the important thing when it comes to TOK. The important part is the critical investigation of the knowledge claim. So a few of you have said, yeah, it's a knowledge claim. That's not an opinion. So if it's a knowledge claim, is it a fact? And if it's a fact, how did we establish it? So we've got something here about the universe being the age of the universe being worked out by the rate of expansion of the universe, and then working backwards to find a point in time where everything was all in one place. So there's good evidence for that has been collected by astronomers, and cosmologists have provided some theories for that. And we, the part of the naming of that's accepted these days is this idea of what's called a Big Bang. Now, when that Big Bang was named, it was actually named that as a term of derision, as a joke, because people some people thought it's a really stupid idea. And George Gamow was the scientist who came up with that name. Unfortunately, he didn't believe in it, and he got to name it. So it's a scientific claim, isn't it? But there are other claims, aren't there, for how old the universe is? So there are some religions, for example. So, creationists use biblical references and evidence to calculate that the age of the universe is between 6 and 10,000 years old. And then they invent the theory around it. And I use the word invent because all theories are invented. Yeah, they're the stories we tell ourselves to try and come up with an explanation that we can then look for the evidence of. So there are other stories that we tell ourselves about the age of the universe too. But is it only scientists that we accept? Or are there people whose belief system is so strong that they will accept another idea? Then, of course, there's the challenge of, well, how do you deal with the evidence that is being collected? Because scientific evidence, which is based on experimentation and collecting data, has been really, really good at predicting an awful lot of things. And the outcome of a lot of that is that we're communicating now over distance and time using things that have been created as a result of that science. So it's not all wrong. So an interesting scientific claim, that one. Let's look at the next one. And when you're thinking about those same three questions, dig in to how you would go about checking or justifying this. Is it a knowledge claim or is it something else? And who's going to decide? The dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan in 1945 was justified. Have a think, put some ideas in the chat. So this claim is a little reminiscent of the killing is wrong claim at the start, which someone pointed out was a moral claim, that you have a moral compass guiding you on. Some of you here are saying it's a knowledge claim. You can ask people who experienced it. Now, experiencing it doesn't mean that it's necessarily justified. You can experience all sorts of things and you can have things done to you, which you might think, no, that's not justified. In fact, the golden rule of ethics says that you should not do anything to somebody else that you wouldn't want them to do to you. And is it ever going to be justified to kill 250,000 people in one go, which is what happened when those 2 bombs were dropped on Japan? So maybe an opinion. Sia, you've said there it's an opinion. Snigda, it's an opinion. You could look at the immediate and long-term consequences. Now, which subject area do we use to look at long-term consequences of, where we reflect on what happened and we look at the evidence for decisions that were made, what was going on? Aditya, you've said that the US government has to justify their action, right? And of course, this was happening at a time of war. These countries were at war. But yes, it's history. So that's the area of knowledge where we look back at the evidence. And just like the science, though, somebody pointed out that science theories change. Absolutely they do. As we learn more, we adapt our theories. The atomic theories over the last 300 years have been a brilliant example of that kind of change when new evidence is presented. Whether dropping the bombs on Japan is justified or not depends on the perspective you take of the evidence that you've got in front of you. And you're right there, Tanya. It is difficult to determine, isn't it? Because what did those bombs do? They killed 250,000 people, mostly civilians, but they did end the war. So how many people would have died if the war hadn't ended? It might have been more. How many more people would have died in America? Because the Japanese Air Force came across to Pearl Harbor in the Pacific, and that was an attack. I think that was the first attack on American home soil until the Twin Towers went down, wasn't it? So there's an American perspective, And then you're going to have a Japanese perspective, but then you're going to have the perspective of everybody else who all of a sudden doesn't want an atomic bomb being detonated above them. Yeah. So the historical evidence is what we're going to have to look at. But again, it's full of power. It's full of politics. It's full of people justifying themselves after the fact rather than before the fact sometimes. And maybe it just came down to the fact that the Americans had developed an atomic bomb and they wanted to test it. Is that justification enough? Well, if it ends a war, maybe it is. So all of these things can be considered, and there's more. And it doesn't need to be right either. So you're going to be asked in TOK what you think, or to what extent do you agree with, or to assess an idea. It doesn't have to be right, what you say, but it does need to be justified. It needs to be balanced, and you need to look at it from different perspectives so that you show you are not only thinking from your point of view, because we all have different points of view. Let's look at the next slide. Same 3 questions. Is it a knowledge claim or something else? How would you go about checking and justifying it? And who gets to decide if it's true? The claim is that the square root of 2 is irrational. Take a moment, have a think, and share your ideas in the chat. Oh, gosh, thanks for putting something in the chat. There we go. Maybe mathematics isn't the first thing at the front of all of our minds. It's a claim. It states something that can be proven true or false. Yeah, the knowledge claim. Mathematical proofs justify it. So you're already starting to talk about another area of knowledge, which is mathematics. It's a knowledge claim. Any rational number should be represented as a fraction of integers. We've got some definitional work here as well going on. A knowledge claim, you can actually prove it yourself by justifying on how it's not a rational number, which makes it irrational. So you can, there are ways in which we come up with mathematical proofs. And you're already using your language here to make definitions and arguments about it. What's interesting here is, I need to work out what irrational means, don't I? I can talk about people being irrational. We normally use that as an expression for people who are saying stuff I don't agree with. We sometimes try to put others down when we don't agree with them by making claims about them as people using the word irrational. That's a linguistic game, isn't it? But in mathematics, the word irrational has a very particular meaning. Yeah? The proof is valid and the claim is accepted as true. Absolutely. Now, mathematics as a knowledge system is an interesting one. You don't experiment in mathematics, but you do have these big ideas that are based on fairly key things, like what a unit is, what a number line might be, what a right angle might be. And then you build up theorems that you then put to the test. You can show eventually that all triangles drawn on a single plane have internal angles that add up to 180 degrees. You can show that the square root of 2 is irrational. But you can also ask the question, does it matter anyway? Something that's interesting about mathematics is that the square root of 2 over here is going to be the same as the square root of 2 over there. That means it's universal. Although if I go to another planet in another solar system in a different galaxy, will people know what the square root of 2 is? Have they come up with their own conception of that? Do they know what a unit circle is? Does it mean the same thing to them? So mathematics can do things and we can put it to the test universally and we can prove it, but within itself. You can't go and look up other source material because there is mathematics. That's the source material. And things that were right 2,000 years ago are still right today in mathematics. things haven't changed. We haven't got a better conception of what triangles are. We have a better conception of what an atom is. So there's something different about the nature of science and mathematics. Something I think is lovely about science is about mathematics is you can be quite certain. You know what the square root of 2 is. You know what a triangle is. It's absolutely there. So few opinions there, although you can have an idea about the beauty of mathematics, perhaps. Let's look at the next claim. Same 3 questions. Beethoven's Fifth is one of the greatest pieces of music ever written. Is this a knowledge claim or something else? How would you go about checking or justifying it? And who gets to decide if it's true? Got people sharing that it's an opinion. Art is something that we may not easily quantify. An opinion, people can justify it by comparing music. The effect that it has on our brain, you can certainly measure. That's an element of investigating something scientifically, or perhaps neurologically, human scientifically, to see what music does. But the opinion about the music itself, that's certainly something that's going to depend on all sorts of things. If I listen to Beethoven's Fifth, I grew up in Western Europe. I have a sense of the history of classical music. And when I hear that, it doesn't sound strange to me. It sounds big and full of energy. Someone who's grown up with a different musical tradition might hear that very, very differently. As I did when I moved to India and first listened to Hindustani classical music, I had to learn a different way that music was constructed and put together. So our culture shapes the way that we might think about this. I know that my own children don't think Beethoven's Fifth is one of the greatest pieces of music ever. They might have an idea that Beethoven was a composer and there's a reason why he's famous. But their musical taste is somewhat different from mine. Where did that taste come from? Me as the knower, being influenced by my parents, my culture, my country, where I grew up, the time I grew up. Beethoven's Fifth was the rock music of the day. I live in Leipzig, where Johann Sebastian Bach used to work at the Thomaskirche. Baroque music was rock music at the time. But now it just sounds old, doesn't it? It's just something different. And I much prefer Coke Studios versions of music than some of the other classical music that I've listened to in India. So we have this opinion, we have this taste. And as someone's pointed out, art, that's another area of knowledge. So it's a completely different, far more subjective, far more creative sphere, in which I can see things differently, but I'm not right, and you're not right, and we're not wrong either. We just hear, see, and think differently when it comes to what art is trying to do. And yet, what art is trying to do can be very, very particular. And again, it's one of those elements where power and politics comes into art, because art isn't just music, it's not just painting, it's writing, it's plays, it's dance. And very often, when it comes to political changes, writers, playwrights, they're putting themselves at risk, sharing new ideas in a way that other people can access and listen to. Poets as well. They create beautiful work, but it can be seen as quite dangerous. And often writers and artists get banned by governments in some parts of the world that don't want people seeing or hearing what they have to say. So there's elements of power and culture in art, as well as those elements of beauty and enjoyment, and sharing things that unite us. And in fact, art is very much part of the culture that we bring, that we grow up in. I'm just seeing a lot more comments on this as well. Yeah, interesting. That idea, Snigdha, that idea that how do you tell if something is great or one of the greatest? So that question that we saw earlier, who gets to decide? So if I'm interested in music, but I don't play music, is my opinion less valid? Would a musical scholar have a more valuable opinion than I do? A friend of mine is a professor at the Music Conservatory in Leipzig. I think that her opinion probably is more valuable than mine when it comes to classical music. But my taste and what makes me feel when I listen to this music, that can't be taken away either, can it? So opinions matter to all of us, but some people's opinions can be more important. And it's certainly not a fact, is it? There is no way that I am able to prove this. Gosha, you're right. The same way as a mathematical fact. It is completely different. So we've seen 4 different claims. Some of them are more at the knowledge claim, testable, contestable end of the spectrum. Some of them are more opinions. Let me just go to the next slide, on which we've got here the areas of knowledge that we look at in TOK. Now, you've done many subjects in school, but some of them fit into the basket of, let's say, the natural sciences. So you've done physics and chemistry and and biology. You might have done earth science as well. You might have done material science. Those fit into the natural sciences. There's a particular way of working there that makes them different from the human sciences. Things like psychology, anthropology, economics, geography, business management, those fit into the human sciences. What's the difference there? Well, if I'm a scientist and I'm experimenting, I can experiment all day on a block of wood, and I will always get the same result with that experiment. But if I try and do the same thing more than once to a person, then they learn. They're not the same person after the first experiment. So I'm actually trying to then make generalizations about people who are all different rather than all the same. So there is a division between natural and human sciences. Mathematics, that's an area where I don't experiment, but I test claims that I make about the nature of mathematical reality. I've also then got history, which I think many of us think that history is a bit like human sciences, a bit like some of those other subjects that we learn in school. But really, it's quite different, because that's the subject area where I am a detective and I have to go and find the evidence for things and the source material of things and the documentary proof that this or that happened. I can't experiment in history. I can't go back and repeat things and do it again because it happened. But what I can do is try and learn more about what did happen around this thing to try and understand it more deeply. And then we've got the arts there. Things like theatre, perhaps we might have in school, drama. We've got fine art, the painting, the sculpture that we might have done in school. We've got music. Some schools, you're also learning dance, another form of art. And then literature comes into art as well. So the art of language and writing, playwriting, and of course the most sort of highly concentrated kind of writing, which is poetry. So those are the areas of knowledge that we look at in TOK. Just going to move back here now. So what I'd like you to do, just for a moment, is to think again about those subject areas. Can you place every one of your subjects at school into one of those? And can you think about the way in which they work? Think about your favorite subject. Can you put something in the chat about the way in which your favorite subject works and the stuff that you have done that is very much about that subject itself? So I'm a physics teacher. I love physics at school. And there are some key elements of physics that make it pretty different from the other subject that I enjoyed, that was art. What were those differences? Can you have a think and put some ideas in the chat about the the key differences between some of these subject areas. So Gosha had already written the human sciences are more objective with repeatable knowledge. That's those experiments you can just run again and again and again. And that people, the human behavior element, is the difficult part. Snigdha, you'd written about economics being that sort of combination. You're right. I mean, we use mathematics as a tool in other subject areas. So if you're a biologist, you will use statistical analysis with your data to see whether or not you can reach a reasonable conclusion and test a hypothesis. And again, you use mathematics in your economics as well. But the economic side of it is talking about having this, planet that's an infinite resource. We can exploit resources, we can trade labor and capital. That the economics is one particular way of looking at how people organize themselves. And then the mathematics is a way of analyzing the data on it. Physics works by observing measurable quantities. Absolutely. So I plan an experiment and then I measure things. And that data that I measure, I can then analyze using some mathematics. And hopefully that mathematics is functional, it's right, it's consistent. And then I can end up drawing a conclusion based on that. Yeah. Just looking at some other people's ideas here. Maths is linear, cumulative in nature, based on a universal logic. Well, the word logic's interesting there, isn't it? You can actually use mathematics to express elements of philosophical logic. Maths is a beautiful, clear language that only has one meaning. And you can use it to draw conclusions about this or that, not this and that. All of a sudden, that sounds like the way computer chips work. Of course, coding is another type of language where you're getting a machine to do something very straightforward, which is add ones and zeros, but you build a beautiful, complicated story around that in order for the machine to make other things happen. But it's basically addition going on. And then we can assign a coordinate to anything on a screen. We can assign a number to that color. And all of a sudden, you've got CGI all over a screen that's just with ones and zeros. Yeah, biology. I agree with you there, Gosha. Biology doesn't often fit neatly into simple binary categories. It's so true. You've got elements of humans. You've got mathematics in there. You've got geography in there as well, haven't you? I mean, there's so many things that make biology so interesting. And then, of course, if you zoom right into biology, you've got quantum physics happening there as well. I mean, maybe these boundaries that we've invented in these subject areas are just like the boundaries on the maps we were talking about earlier, where someone has drawn a line. Maybe they're not real at all. And that physics that's happening inside that cell, that's happening inside that creature that makes decisions, doesn't fit neatly into any bucket at all. And that's a little bit of the way that you need to think. As a critical thinker, you're trying to think of the context in which claims about knowledge, where I get my knowledge from, actually work. Now, you're going to be going back to school. Some of you are going to be starting the TOK course, and some of you are partway through. Maybe some of you have already done your TOK exhibition. There are two pieces of assessment in TOK. One of them is called the exhibition, and you have to choose a prompt. So the TOK course guide doesn't have many specific things in it that your teacher has to do. But for the exhibition, there's a list of 35 statements or questions that you will have to choose one of. And then you're going to have to write about what this prompt makes you think of. And you're going to use 3 objects as the focal points of a discussion. And that discussion takes place on paper. You're graded for what you write, 950 words, and then you have to present it to some people at school. Many schools choose to present it to the grade 10s so that they know what's coming next year. The other thing that you will be doing is writing an essay 1,600 word essay in response to one of 6 statements or questions that you will be given in the second year of the TOK course. And that's the assessment for TOK. Your teacher marks the exhibition, and that gets checked by the IB. But an IB examiner, someone like me, for example, would get sent 200 essays to read after the end of the school year, and you get graded based on how you do in that essay. So start that habit of thinking out loud. Start sharing your ideas with people, even if it's awkward to start with, and even if you think that your ideas might not be very good. Everybody else thinks the same too. Don't worry about it. Start sharing ideas. Start having conversations with people about questions that matter, and bring ideas to your classes. And what I'd like you to think about doing, the last slide up here, when you do go back into your classes, think about what you're actually being told in your classes, and try and bring a critical mind to what you're learning. And when I say that, I don't mean don't believe what your teachers are telling you. That would be silly. But what I mean is always think, how do we know that? Or is that really true? Or who got to decide that? And if you go in to your subject areas with that approach, it's going to make your thinking deeper, and you are going to be asking better questions. So before the next time we meet, because we're going to have a second session here at Sparkl to try and help you be better TOK students when you get into that classroom, think about your favorite subject, perhaps, and think about something that you're going to be learning. How did we get to know that thing? How reliable is that knowledge? And how do we put it to the test? And maybe that's you doing a little bit more reading than just accepting something is true. Maybe it's digging behind the history of that idea in science or in biology. But try and bring 2 or 3 examples to our next session, and try and write down some notes and some thoughts on it. Because the more you practice thinking out loud, the better you are going to be at doing it. Thinking out loud is just like learning a musical instrument. And what I've learned from teaching students over 25 years is that they think that they've got a lot of ideas in their head. And many of them like to start saying what those ideas are. But it's always more useful to start by writing them. And if you can actually write it, it really does mean that you can think it. So practice that for next time. If anyone's got any questions, then please share in the chat and we can have a look at a couple of questions. Otherwise, I look forward to meeting you next time. I'm just reading Snigda's question there. Who gets to decide how these AOKs are separated? I do wonder. I think that it's the specialists, isn't it? The people in those areas of specialization. We know that in the sciences, for example, we have physics, chemistry, and usually biology in school. But if you think of the Nobel Prizes that get given out each year, there's a Nobel Prize for physics, there's a Nobel Prize for chemistry, and there's a Nobel Prize for medicine and physiology. But there isn't one for biology, because in 1901, when the first Nobel Prize was awarded, biology didn't exist. In the same way that some countries didn't exist. Yeah? So as we've become more specialized, we like to label stuff. It's incredible human nature to categorize. That's how scientific we are. We just want to categorize and measure all the time. So we categorize, and then we draw boundaries, and then we become experts in it. Nandana has written about context. Context is usually important when deciding if a particular knowledge is accepted or rejected. Yeah, context matters so much. Who's telling me this thing? That's important, isn't it? Where did they get that information from? What's the purpose of it? What's the consequence going to be? Yeah. What exactly can be considered as goodness me? There's so much to it, isn't there? Just thinking about the difference between my context sitting here in Germany and your context sitting where you are, and what's going on around us. The history of those places, the culture of those places, all of these develop context. And I think that really trying to dig down and understand what is the context will be very useful and important. In fact, one of the TOK essay questions this year was about context and how much context mattered in the presentation of a knowledge claim. All right. Well, if there's no other comments at the moment, thank you very much for taking part and for being here. And I look forward to seeing you next time.